This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Artisanal Agency, the exclusive representative of the This Week in Tech podcast network. Reach Twit.tv's tech-savvy, affluent, highly engaged audience by booking your campaign now. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 570, Influencer Politics. December 2nd, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. Politicians have always sought endorsements. But now, as modern campaigns embrace more sophisticated approaches, influencer marketing is eclipsing traditional endorsements as a key tactic. Is this a good thing, though? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, why Hollywood continues to embrace out-of-home, pragmatism about cancel culture, why we should ditch performance reviews, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal of Beetle Moment Marketing, voice marketing expert, Ms. Emily Binder. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Bob. Excited to be back here with a great panel tonight.
Yeah, it is a good panel. And speaking of that panel, she's a direct-to-consumer consultant and host of the Wendi Cooper Show, Speaking of Age podcast, Ms. Wendi Cooper. Wendi, you're back.
I am back, and thanks for having me, Bob. Yes, I do love. This is like the dream team. It is.
Well, let's round out that dream team. He's an innovator and a tech investor, as well as host of several podcasts, including 6 Pixels of Separation and No Trouble. Author, speaker, and an insanely prolific blogger, Mr. Mitch Joel is here. Mitch, how are you?
Bobby, how are you?
I'm doing well. Well, the first topic is yet another political one. We've been on this Jones for several weeks now because it's always in the news, these political marketing stories. The ad world's struggling to deal with the problem of political advertising on digital platforms. So political campaigns are embracing other tactics to get by, and they're more fully embracing one particular digital tactic now, influencer marketing. Now, to be clear, this is not a new tactic for campaigns. A lot of campaigns, both in 2016 and before, have embraced influencer marketing tactics. However, the sophistication of the implementation is definitely maturing, providing campaigns with not just an endorsement, but amplification of that endorsement, as well as access to audience mobilization like never before. Emily, how is this different from traditional celebrity endorsement, and has it become the new essential tactic of political campaigning? What's your thoughts on this?
I don't think it's that different from traditional celebrity endorsement, except obviously the platform and the ability to hyper-target. There's a feedback loop when it comes to social media. I think the difference, though, is that with influencers, if somebody's following one of these people, they've raised their hand and said, yes, I want to hear from you. So it seems less nefarious than other political ads, which of course were just banned from Twitter in October because they are so problematic. This pales in comparison, I think, but I don't think it's essential. I mean, is it essential to have influencers for marketing any product? No, it's powerful and helpful and oftentimes a good value.
Yeah, I don't know if I fully agree with that. And I usually do agree with Emily, so that's interesting. I look at it really differently. I think that right now, in a day and age where you have this sort of stopping of ads, we have to understand at a very fundamental level that just because you're stopping ads, it doesn't mean you're stopping content. And this feels to me to be a very cheap, easy, and smart way to get at scale, to get the message across. to have a certain control over where this information comes from. It's not just one certain head of state with a massive Twitter account, but suddenly armies and millions of people who will be sharing, who will be curating, who will be editorializing, and this ability to trail back and figure out the wheat from the chaff and which message is correct and what should we know in a world of fake news, in a world where influencers have a real hard time with disclosure, specifically around unpaid type of influencer, genuine influencer work. It's really scary to me. And I think that this sort of idea of it's small or it's a small media spend is the wrong metric. And if we look at that or think that influencers aren't going to be influential in terms of their ability to spread these messages at scale in a world where we like to click and share without really looking at where the source comes from or just believing the source because we follow them. And the only real sort of thing we're seeing on the other side is payment via swag and access. It doesn't really reek of transparency and authenticity to me. And being a Canadian, I find this extremely concerning in terms of if we're looking to figure out how do we regulate that whole sphere, this is probably going to be the last domain of it that would be regulated. And again, if we sort of separate this idea of advertising from content, I think we should be really scared if this is where they're going with that level of sophistication and technology behind it.
You know what? I agree with you, Mitch. I guess I was more so answering Bob's question of, is this essential or is it that different? It is different. It's very frightening, especially if you consider that the intelligence and the media literacy level of the average user, especially people who are going to even look at one of these influencers and value what they have to say about politics, is low. It's frighteningly low.
There's no regulation. We have nobody watching the watchers here. And if I was running any form of campaign and worried about my ability to access certain target audiences because of the sort of ad issue behind Twitter and Facebook, this would be my first port of call, and it's clear that this is the direction they're going in.
Well, the thing that we can't separate out the problems with digital advertising from the use of influencer marketing, because digital advertising got into a lot of trouble mainly because things were amplified by influencers. I mean, by people who had large audiences. They shared this misinformation to the wider audience, and they caused these problems. So, you know, it might be going a little bit further downstream, but it's still susceptible to the same types of tactics and same types of misinformation that we've been dealing with all along. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily a panacea. Wendi, you were going to say something, I think?
I was going to say something, but now I don't think I'm going to say anything. I'm seriously confused. You know, I often want to scream about the difference between celebrity endorsements and influencers. I think that there's such an incredible difference between those two things. Okay. And yet I went back when, you know, I looked at the reference material, and then I went back and I looked at the influencers that they were talking about, which is this Chapo guy or somebody, and then this DeFranco person that's on YouTube. And they're YouTube influencers. And what they do is they kind of take the news and they do these 20-minute segments that I completely got lost in. So I don't know how anybody sits for 20 minutes to listen to somebody talk as fast as they possibly can talk, and they're talking about the daily news, and they're shoving it all down your throat. But none of it was really opinionated. I didn't think any of it was opinionated. So I look at influencers as somebody that has an opinion, and they're sharing their opinion. That's, to me, an influencer, right? It's like, this is what I think, this is what I do, and you're my followers, and you're my tribe, and I'm going to influence you. So that's why I'm just kind of confused as to what really is the top.
I don't see it as that, and I think even saying there's celebrities and there's influencers is a misnomer. When you can walk into a Target and get a baseball hat or swag from Ninja or any other sort of quote unquote influencer out in the space, I think influencers are probably some of the biggest celebrities because of their reach and dominance in terms of actually having that community and ability to communicate and get trends started, and things that even just regular celebrities are sort of eye rolled over these days. And in terms of the people in this actual article that we're talking about, I think it's only a small fraction of the real issue, which is that if you actually do look at these influencers, a lot of them are only curating one side of the conversation. They're definitely editorializing on it. They're definitely adding in the comments, which isn't necessarily the core content, but it's still a very massive component of then what gets extracted and then extrapolated and turned into content of its own. And I think it's really fuzzy and not clearly delineated at all. And I think it's really hard for somebody who may not be as media savvy as the good people on this panel to really understand, is this really an overview of the news? How much out of all of this content is actual real news? How much is fake news? Who is vetting this? Who is editing this? Who is publishing this? And it is extremely problematic in a world where every single major platform is being held to the fire for what they're going to do about fake news or ads on the platform, and yet everybody underneath it who's publishing on the platform has complete free reign to create, distribute, share, and amplify anything. And I think, if anything, celebrities are following these influencers too. And I think I'm putting my big hand on the alarm here and saying this is going to be a major component of the election. Already has been. If you look at things like you talked about Pizzagate and other things that have happened in previous election cycles, a lot of it was exactly in the cauldron of influencers. And some of those influencers are what I would account to be known celebrities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just, I think we get caught up talking a lot about the American side of things, or as in your case, the Canadian side of things, North America. But obviously, this is affecting politics globally. I mean, people are starting to look toward the influencer marketing as an opportunity to bypass the digital problems that have been experienced and get right to the audience with a message that's tailor-made for them and completely biased toward them. I mean, it doesn't give, like you were saying, Mitch, the ability to offer a counterpoint of view. And I'm wondering where
it's completely free. I mean, look at what's happening. The payment is like baseball hats and access to rallies and stuff. And so what's happening is the influencers essentially saying, oh, more content for me to create. I mean, you see this if you follow the influencer circle and see how things get shared and propagated. And we need to be very, very meticulous about how we think about this and talk about this. If you've got young children who are following news highlights and newsreels for school, it's very hard when that right side of the YouTube channel or the feed is giving them algorithmically similar content that is being curated in a very specific, slanted, and not necessarily truthful way.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of a larger problem overall, which is when you're following, it's an echo chamber. It's confirmation bias at its worst. I'm following people who say the same things that I already believe because that's what I want to read, because it makes my brain feel good. Most people don't want to expose themselves to things that produce cognitive dissonance. So, I mean, that's scary in and of itself. And then when you throw in micro-targeting, there was one of these articles, there's a group called Main Street One, a progressive tech startup that helps with digital campaigns, and they have these voter persuasion campaigns for Michigan and Ohio for the 2020 presidential race. But then, so what do you do? Do you say, okay, you can't talk about this topic?
You can't have an opinion and publish it.
Well, let's
I mean,
take
how
this.
do you ban, like, what?
Let's talk pragmatically about this. Let's talk pragmatically about this. Now, you know, we can see all the problems right now, but how does this evolve? How does this get better or potentially worse? And what do we look for? How do we legislate? How do we manage this process? Anybody have any predictions or thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's what the confusion is. For me, that's where I get confused. It's like, what, obviously, being influenced, Hitler, had a lot of influence. Okay. So it's like, it starts to get very scary, and Mitch is right. There has to be some type of controls, but then Emily is right. It's like, well, what do you really do about that? Where do you start where are those boundaries, and where are the lines, and are they really ads, or are they being paid? If they get a hat, so what? And now they talk about somebody, and then 50 million people go to the voting booth and vote for somebody because somebody wore a hat and said you should do that. It just seems so mind-bogglingly stupid in one sense, And then on the other sense, it's like so like diabolical almost. It's like, how do you control that?
It's diabolical because we're dealing with an unprecedented cache of data. So you can test different approaches and identify the users who are most susceptible to your message. It's not the same as seeing somebody in their hat on the news, on TV, because it's in a feed that's there for a very specific reason and a specific targeted user.
You're asking for, I mean, Bob, what you're essentially talking about is a more transparent environment. And I don't think anybody doesn't want that. And I think that that's where we start. We start in a world that says Mitch Joel is an influencer, or he's active on Instagram. Some of his content may be paid for. Some of his content may be slanted, or not slanted, but created because he was somehow, a part of and or given. And I think that there is a real desire to be able to click on my face and have it turn almost like the old school trading cards would have, that shows affiliations, ads taken, all that sort of information. And I feel that there is the data and reality behind it that is accessible and is available to come out into the sunlight.
Especially for influencers, like I can understand like that's kind of scary for the average user to have like your picture turn over and have all your stats available to everybody. But if you're putting yourself out there in public, you've made a lot of data about yourself available to the public, and it should be available at a glance to anybody using that platform. I agree with you.
And your ability to publish it should also be predicated on your comfort in understanding that should you publish this type of content, we will be assigning to it tags or transparencies around whether it was paid for, whether it was because you're a member of, whether there was an ad ever taken, or how many mentions you have of it versus others. There's actually a really simple way to be able to eyeball a piece of content and know where it's from. We forget that that is what traditional media did. It may have been slanted left or right, but you knew exactly the publication because you were reading it. And this is the problem. We tend to go Facebook is the problem, or Instagram's problem, or Google's the problem, but it's really not. It's understanding the actual source, which isn't the platform, it's who's publishing it. Who advertises on Mitch's channel? Who is he paid to endorse? And all of that information can't be shared or pushed forward without somebody almost like when you go to do your check-in at an airport, you got to sort of say like I'm okay to sit in the emergency zone because I'm 18 or over. I'm not pregnant. You can go through this and then see the content, knowing full well that this person is paid for this. They've done this. This piece of content is political. I'm acknowledging check, and then you are aware. But this transparency of bringing it forward with all of this data is the actual core of the problem, and it's also where we start.
Right. That's just what the contract for the web from Tim Berners-Lee, but that's part of what it's about, which is there should be essentially a dashboard where I can toggle on and off what I'm sharing and see what these companies like Google and Facebook have on me. And interestingly, it's Microsoft, Twitter, Google, and Facebook that all are backing the contract for the web, not Amazon, at least not yet. But this calls into question the entire idea of Facebook ads, which they launched in 2007. It hasn't always been this way, but it's just such an important thing to really question right now. And Facebook's fiduciary responsibility is to its shareholders. It's not to the public. It's not to the greater good.
I had mentioned that perhaps the solution is to not ban political ads, because I think that will actually quiet voices. I mean, to me, advertising is just paid information, and I think everybody should have access to paid information. My comment was maybe we should just turn off all targeting so that it becomes somewhat more expensive and very hard in the fake news world to really point it at a specific audience. And the feedback I got both publicly and on the side was that if you bought an ad, consider it run of network on any of these social media platforms, they're already so sophisticated, they're not really running it to everybody. They're already doing its own form of targeting because they need your ad to perform well. If it doesn't perform well, you're not going to amp it up or do more of it. So imagine the world we live in where you could actually say, please turn off all targeting, make this general run of network, and they're still targeting just to optimize against your buy.
That makes the problem worse in a lot of ways, doesn't it? Because it takes away your say in how you're targeting. It just makes it
It's
their
a nightmare.
targeting. Yeah, it's a
Yeah, it
nightmare
kind of
scenario.
defeats the whole. Oh, sorry, it defeats the whole purpose. That's ridiculous. I would be so pissed if that happens to me.
But that's why transparency would work, right? Suddenly, if every ad you saw, you knew who the creator was, the publisher, types of audience it was targeted to, why you're seeing it. I think that ability is very, very easy if they're able to target without you requesting targeting.
Right. They have the information. It's just not visible. And nobody is demanding it. Google just transmitted 50 million health records. No, people aren't up in arms about this. We just accept it. We didn't realize, oh, maybe the internet doesn't have to be this way based on mining data.
And we covered that story a couple of weeks ago about Google taking the health data. I mean, everything about that was on the up and up. It was legitimate, except they weren't transparent about it. They didn't tell people they were doing it. And that's the sin. That's the sin of all tech. A lot of the things that they're doing is they're not necessarily bad things or illegal things. It's just the lack of transparency makes it so easy for bad things to happen.
One could argue that you could replace the word technology with advertising and marketing across the board.
Yeah, you probably could, because most of the platforms are built on that entirely. Well, we're going to move on and talk next about entertainment's love of out-of-home. It's a long-standing topic that seems to be gathering steam because of the fact that this is a digital age, and yet people still love billboards. We'll get on that in just a moment. But first, it's that time of year again. You're planning your 2020 media strategy and you're looking for solid new audiences with lots of disposable cash. Well, I can connect you with one audience that's arguably the most responsive and lucrative technology-minded audience out there, because our sponsor, Artisanal Agency, is the exclusive representative for Twit.tv. That's the This Week in Tech podcasting network. We're talking about some great shows here, people. Things like Mac Break Weekly, iOS Today, Windows Weekly, of course, This Week in Tech, so many more. So many great, great shows which are generating phenomenal results for sponsors just like you. Now, here are the numbers. 50 million downloads a year. 50 million downloads a year. 70% of that audience directly works in tech. And 82% of them say that they have bought a product directly as a result of a Twit.tv ad recommendation. And remember, they're not just offering an ad per se. They're offering an actual live read recommendation here. And they can take that responsibility very, very seriously. Not just anyone can advertise on Twit.tv. That's because Artisanal Agency will carefully vet every sponsor so that their hosts can offer your brand a genuine recommendation while everybody else can relax knowing that there won't be any brand safety issues. And it doesn't matter whether you're coming in with a completely baked campaign, you need graphics, you need ad copy help, anything. Artisanal Agency will make it easy for you no matter what situation you're currently in. They're going to ensure that your campaign runs seamlessly, from onboarding hosts to delivering creative assets to monitoring ad reads. Now, I want you to just reach out to them, find out more about this, find out more what a Twit.tv ad run can do for you. Reach out to the artisanalagency.com. That's artisanalagency.com to find out more, or email them at hello@artisanalagency.com. That's hello@artisanalagency.com. Start your next campaign, your next podcast ad campaign, with a show from Twit. And we thank them very much for their support of the BeanCast. Well, if there's one Hollywood marketing tactic you can always bet will make the cut in the final plan, it's the billboard buy. Mitch, startups and entertainments love out of home. I mean, it seems like everywhere I go, I see startups or I see entertainment billboards, especially in New York City. What drives this continued commitment to the media, especially considering the fact that everything else is moving very digital?
I actually really enjoy this story because I was thinking about the duality that is my life, and this is a market of one, so take this with whatever grain of salt you have. I don't actually hate billboards, but I know people who do. I know people who consider this visual pollution. If you look at platforms like Adbusters and actual cities within the world that have actually criminalized billboards. It is illegal to have billboards anywhere. And you'll find online memes where you'll see the city before billboards and then after billboards, and they're all sort of painted up and covered or whatever it is. I actually happen to really like them. I don't know, when I travel a lot, and when I'm popping into cities, I sort of like it gives me a flavor, I think, of business or what's happening in the entertainment world in whatever country I'm in. And I think that plays into what you're talking about. And it's no surprise you see them in New York. You'll see them in places like Times Square. You'll see them for sure as you head out of LAX or SFO in San Francisco. And it just ties into everything we know about advertising, right? Big and bigger. Size matters. It's impactful. And it does create that type of visceral visual impact when you see it. It's got a presence. And when it has presence and impact and size, it does, in our own mammalian DNA, create belief. And from that belief comes the power of brand. And that feeling, that real feeling of, I see that everywhere. That feeling of like that show, that concert, that Netflix special, that company. And it's really, really sort of normal to me. The secondary product that we're seeing from this is obviously, because we are impressed with this as human beings, you see a lot of people who will take pictures, including the celebrities who are starring in these, shows or movies or whatever it is, and then they're sharing it on social, and then people are liking it and sharing it as well. So it's got this sort of redundant factor as it rolls into the social world, and it's really interesting. We happened to work for a fashion company back when I was in the agency business for a long while. And they always had billboards in 2 or 3 very specific locations, one of them being the hometown in which they are based. And the feeling was always the same, that like the owners and the people who worked there, even for the cost of it, felt really proud because, oh yeah, that's the company I work for. Or if they had buyers or vendors coming to town, they would walk out of the airport and take the cab or Uber over to the office and see the billboard once or twice throughout it. I've heard stories of brands who have taken billboards right next to their HQ just so that the CEOs and executives could feel better about themselves as they turn off the freeway onto where the office is.
I've heard the same thing about that. I've heard the same thing about that. It's a standard practice to find what the route home for the CEO or the CMO is, and make sure that there's a billboard on that route. Just to make sure they can see it.
Completely.
If you're trying to recruit people or make people feel good about working at a place, that impact does work. So again, we love to say things like we hate ads and we don't want visual pollution, we don't want ads everywhere, but we take great pride in it. And it's a very basic human thing. It is massive. It is hard to not see. And I think we're just in awe of things of size and stature.
I have one word to say.
Yes.
Angeline.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember Angeline? I mean, sure. her entire career was built on a billboard on Sunset.
In Hollywood.
Yeah. I think it's really glamorous, because I'm in LA, and I think it's kind of like the ultimate, it's the ultimate ad, it's out there in public, it's big, it's bold, it's very cool. I love billboards. I don't like so much the digital ones when they're out of place. They're kind of like, sometimes they're too much and they're not really in place. Kind of like if we did all that digital stuff more so in downtown LA like you do in Times Square, I think that would be a little odd for our culture here.
Well, yeah, it doesn't work unless there's dwell time. That's the problem with video ads is you need dwell time, which means either traffic jam or pedestrian walkways. And every time you get into dealing with a driving culture, you need static images, which is why billboards work so effectively.
Yeah.
And I think it's also quality of location, right?
Yeah,
Go
absolutely.
ahead.
Yeah, because Sunset is like the streaming wars now. It's Netflix and everybody paying tons of money to just have the best, biggest, brightest billboard of what's happening. And that's what's happening on Sunset, which is driving the prices, through the roof. But anyway, I like billboards. I really like them.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because it's not just a world of movies that really dominated it. Now you have also TV shows, you have pay-per-view events, you've got the competitive nature of the Netflix thing, which is obviously Hulu, Amazon Prime, Apple, and others. And I think that competitive nature forces it. And you're right as well, Bob, where there is a delineation between these sort of glamorous billboards in places like Times Square and on the way out of LAX towards Hollywood, versus, just on the freeway, these annoying sort of ones that never change or that just, sort of seem somewhat out of place or just a nuisance. So it's the same thing where if the quality is good and the location of the quality is good, it creates a vibe. I mean, I think about Times Square often and it's very glamorous. I think about Hollywood and it's very glamorous. And there's 2 of 4 of us on the phone who happen to live in these locations, and you can be somewhat blind to it. It's like going to Vancouver and not noticing the mountains anymore that surround the city. It's breathtaking when you see it. But to those who don't live in hubs like New York or LA, when you think about them, you think about those billboards, you think about those moments, that feeling of excitement and motion. And I don't think there's anything more exciting for a celebrity or a media platform to have that type of bragging rights and ownership in those spaces.
Yeah, I agree. I love billboards, actually. I think they demand a level of creativity that we see less of in digital, and it stands out. I was thinking, it was about a year ago, ahead of the 2019 CES, with Apple's billboard on the side of the Marriott in Vegas. It said, "What happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone." I mean, that's so powerful. There's no other medium that could have done it just like that.
The only thing that I have that leads me to counter these thoughts is effectiveness. Wendi, when we talk about effectiveness of ads, we're talking about, do they drive people to actually view the programming? Do they go to the movies? Is this driving people to change their minds about a film? And I'm wondering how much of this is about ego stroking, to make sure that you just create buzz around your movie and actually every other ad is doing the heavy lifting? Or is there real effectiveness in the billboard buy that drives people to the theaters because they saw a billboard?
No, I don't think that it's ever one ad that drives somebody to the theater. I think the only thing that really drives people to a theater is when they see the trailer and they really get engaged and engrossed because of the trailer. I think the billboard is like, once again, the glamorous part of the movie. It's there. It reminds you you're on your way home. What am I going to do tonight, kind of thing, and you're driving by. It's just part of the puzzle. I think the advertising and the marketing puzzle. I don't think there's any way to ever quantify that. So doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
I agree with Wendi that I think it's a very good staple in the diet of this sort of advertising ecosystem when you're looking to launch some sort of project like that. I don't think we look at billboards as direct response channels.
I was thinking about billboards. I was in downtown Austin and saw a poorly done one. It had very small text, way too much text. I think on the spot, I recorded a flash briefing about it. And it was funny because I got a Google alert for my name or my briefing like a month later, and some billboard blog had picked it up and then commented on the fact that I said, there's a huge opportunity for voice, because the use case of the car is actually the biggest use case for voice. More people have used a voice assistant in the car than they have used a smart speaker. I haven't seen this yet. I'm sure it's been there. Somebody must have done it, but big opportunity to take what's coming with voice and voice assistants in the connected car and to use the CTA on a billboard to drive some action or education.
Just don't drive off the road and keep your hands on the wheels at all times. Yeah.
Well, that's the point, because it's voice activated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that, Emily. It's like, I'm driving down the 405 and I got billboards shouting at me every time I drive.
No, what I'm saying is the billboard would say, ask your in-car voice assistant, whether that's Alexa or Hound or whomever, to find out more about Apple or whatever company.
Oh, okay.
And
so
maybe
the
it would
text,
be
the text on the billboard would say that.
It's a CTA to interact with through voice, and then there's a campaign tied to it. I think this could be huge.
I think it could be as well. It's a really brilliant idea. Well, let's move on and talk next about one of my favorite topics right now, which is cancel culture. Cancel culture runs rampant online, and whether you're accused of killing people or simply running afoul of some woke point of view, the net result is the same: massive online shaming. But Wendi, we already know from past incidents that while the short-term results may be the same either way, for targeted... Let me start this over again. The past incidents was... whatever. The long-term results is that it differs greatly depending on the severity of the offense, one way or another. So how seriously should brands take cancel culture, and what is the right approach to dealing with an attack? I mean, what's your take on this with that very eloquently delivered setup here? Go for it.
Thanks, Bob. Cancel culture. I didn't even know what the hell it was until I got that this question is going to be thrown at me. So now, of course, I've read a lot about cancel culture. I think it's really amazing. I've been enlightened, and don't ask me what bubble I've been living in. But I guess I just didn't know that there was actually a name for it. So I think number one, we need to start a campaign where we have to cancel Trump. Number one. And number two,
I'm pretty sure that campaign exists already.
Pretty sure that's their way.
Well, I know, but I mean, or that he's been canceled. I don't know, because from what I read and what I understand, it's like the last thing you want to happen to your personal brand, your service, yourself. And that it is just mass shaming that it's able to be done because, of social media. Where brands are concerned, what should they do? How do they protect themselves? Where do they draw their lines? I think that I don't know, because it seems to me between the influencer question at the top of the show and this question or this concern about the cancel culture, it seems as though, it's like, what the hell are we doing? What can we do about anything? How do we control you? How do you control the cancel culture? How do you?
I don't think it's a matter of control either. It's just like, as I should have stated in my setup, it's, the short-term results are always bad. You have a whole bunch of people saying negative stuff about you online, and it looks like the end of the world. But in the long term, there's a big difference between, I've polluted the entire Gulf of Mexico and, somebody who says the wrong thing at the wrong time and gets embarrassed because of it. I mean, it's like, long-term results are different. And it's just, it seems like brands are a little too worried about cancel culture, in my opinion. Mitch, you're going to say something?
It just seems like things have evolved so dramatically. And I think that Wendy's really correct in that it ties in really well with the sort of political ad commentary we had earlier. And part of it is this sort of, it used to be, we used to live in a time where a person got dragged off an airline and the whole world cared about it. It's like that. And it seems like that was yesterday, and it likely was. But since then, what's happened is this lack of centrality, this sort of inability for anything to truly capture the zeitgeist of everyone's imagination, this sort of focused silos and algorithms at work have created this lack of centrality and a lack of almost creativity, where these things come out and it's for many people this sort of great eye roll that is somehow politicized versus looked at as a genuine statement of how society feels and is reacting to something either a brand or politician or somebody did, because we just don't see much. We actually don't see anything anymore, do we? And there's this problem. And if you actually go back and study some of these moments where people really were up in arms about a politician or a brand doing something stupid, what we see is at the core of what made it capture the zeitgeist was traditional media really pushing it. And because traditional media is so much on the attack of the platforms, I think they're hesitant to promote them in terms of things they're doing well, or people within that who are publishing things that might have the right to be surfaced in a more traditional way. And just think about it, like, here we are recording this in the middle of Black Friday or Cyber Monday. And this is a moment in time where Patagonia had done a really big thing about don't shop, our stores are closed, go outside. And it's a story that I'm saying now because I obviously remember it, but I don't think that created a movement to actually cancel Cyber Monday or cancel Black Friday. So we have this sort of culture, we called it slacktivism, and I think it's evolved into this sort of, we share but we don't care. It's like, oh, I'll show and share this because it's either cool or interesting, but I'm not going to actually cancel or do anything about it. And I loved how the article talked about this ability, this sort of idea of accountability arbitrage. And think about delete Facebook. What did delete Facebook do? Look at the numbers, look at the growth, look at the integration now of Instagram and what it looks like. I mean, it almost seems laughable, like people thought this would be serious and people would be running in droves away from Facebook. The exact opposite has happened. And so I think we need to get serious about it ourselves. And we talk about pragmatism, about cancel culture. The question is, are we being pragmatic about it? Do we have a culture where people will genuinely cancel, cut out, and no longer support a brand or an individual because of what they stand for? The numbers don't show that. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I think it's important, but the numbers don't reflect that this creates any real form of cultural movement.
Well, it does for individuals, right? Not for brands necessarily. I mean, people get blacklisted, or with Me Too, you're done. Isn't that
Well, I mean,
part of this?
we could argue that. I mean, we could argue that some people were done. We could argue that it became so much that a lot of people who should have been done actually aren't done. And we could argue that some of the people that were done, we sort of forgotten about because there were so many of them.
Yeah,
You know, I
go
think
ahead.
there was so much political correctness when I was growing up, and there was no social media yet. But it was like that culture. It didn't have the platform and the whole groupthink and the speed that it spreads. But it was sort of that same. It was almost like you can't say certain things because that won't be accepted. But now it's like on steroids. I don't know
Well,
that everybody.
now you can say everything and then you can say nothing. Right? It's like you're sort of in the middle where people say the craziest stuff, but then there are people you can't say anything because, going back to what Bob said earlier, there's a bit of the woke police up there too.
The woke police. Yeah.
Yeah,
So everyone's outraged, but then you're saying they don't take action. They don't necessarily leave. I mean, I think Facebook's user numbers are down, right? But of course, Instagrams are up. So are we talking Facebook.com, Facebook as a company? As a company, sure, doing great.
I think if you look at the mountaintops in terms of users and growth, this was the first year where it wasn't even flatlining on American users. It was up, revenue up. And I know people will say, yeah, but that's because they integrated Instagram and all that. I'm like, I don't really care one way or the other. People like to separate the two. I don't know why. Oh, this is my bad child. This is my good child. Like, I don't understand that logic when it comes to how we feel about companies. But overall, they're doing great. They're doing great. Do you know anybody who's been like, no, you know what? I'm not going to share pictures of my friends and families and connect on Facebook because I don't like what they're doing with my data. I mean, we don't see that. We see the media, we see politicians because they're really good targets. And I'm not saying they're targets that should be targeted, but the average consumer, we're not seeing. I mean, we're not. And I know people are probably going to yell and scream at you, Bob, and comment that Mitch is an idiot. I would say go and look at the track record historically about user growth, time spent, how the brand is perceived, and revenue coming in, and you're just not going to see a blip.
No, I agree with you, and nobody has ever come to me and said that about you, Mitch. So I'm not too worried about that happening this time.
Yeah.
But
You're gonna get canceled.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Let's
Mitch,
cancel
I already
BeanCast.
canceled you.
Cancel. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean,
Take it.
How weird is
I
that?
think we've hit some really good points here that need to be kind of highlighted. I mean, yes, individuals are probably more susceptible to long-term cancels effect than brands are, simply because individuals carry all the responsibility for their own comments and their own actions, whereas companies can move the blame around and can make it so that they can make some kind of mea culpa or come up with a whole new product. You can't necessarily relaunch your personality. So yes, there is that. Some people can try to relaunch their personality, but it doesn't always work. So yeah, there is that factor, but I still see it as being, unless you've done something really horrible, people tend to forget and forgive. And it's just like, it's just the way it is. I mean, even you can think of any examples of major cancels before it was called cancels. It was just, flame wars online. But you can think of example after example of brands and individuals who have suffered under the watchful eye of the wokegasm going on online. And, suddenly, they're out, and then the next thing you know, they're back in. I think they used in the article we were referencing the fact that Aziz Ansari is, showing up again, even though people think that he's canceled. He's not canceled. He's coming back. He's getting audiences. He's showing up at comedy clubs. Whereas Louis C.K. has not been able to come back because his offense was worse than what was.
No, Louis C.K. is packing houses all around the country. He
Yeah,
actually is coming back. I think that it's just a really stupid, trendy, stupid thing called getting canceled, and it's going to go away just like anything else. As you're talking about it, it's like everybody that's been canceled, it's like temporary, and it comes back. I mean, then do you really think a brand like Nike or like Adidas, people getting pissed off because was it Adidas that pulled from Amazon, or was it Nike that Nike pulled from Amazon?
We don't even remember, and we're in the business, yeah.
And everybody was like, well, I'm never going to buy Nike. It was just so ridiculous. Goodbye, good riddance. And it was like, what are you people talking about? This is just a decision that was made by a shoe company.
But it also plays into what Emily said. You feel that sort of filter bubble and echo chamber really big when you look at the cancel culture. It really is sort of symbiotic with the friends you are and the circles you run in, and people who are not in that just don't see it. And I think the sort of Me Too movement needs to be separated from this because of the severity of it and the inequity of it and the unfairness of it and the overall cruelty of it. And I say this being, full disclosure, both have an unconscious bias, and I am one of those male, pale, and stale individuals that we're talking about to a certain degree, not in a bad way, but I mean it just being a male, middle-aged white guy. And I think it's, to me, what happened there is the veracity and the speed with it and the severity of it created some form of confusion and an inability to sort of remember. And when you hear about an Aziz Ansari or Louis C.K., it becomes this conversation. Well, was he canceled? Is he back? Are they doing something? Are they packed? And it's this weird thing where if you're not in that sort of world, you almost don't know. You just make the assumption that they're gone and gone forever. And some of them are creeping back in. But it's, to me, it's different than a brand that did something stupid or a politician that said something stupid, because it's just just the sheer severity of what we're talking about when it comes to Me Too, which is really, really different, unfortunately. But because it all gets lumped in together in one social feed, it becomes really hard to see. I mean, how many times do we see a celebrity death on Facebook and we go, oh my God, I can't believe they died. And you realize not only is it from 4 or 5 years ago, but you remember seeing it 4 or 5 years ago. We're inundated. And if we, in the second, it's there and it's gone. And the problem is that we can't weigh the weight of that content properly. So somebody as sort of insane as a Harvey Weinstein sort of seems in the moment as equally important as people who are going to burn their Nikes or whatever. And that's absurd that we would even put those two in the same sentence, but that's the feed we live in.
Well, it's the power of the people, and that's all that it is.
It's the power of the headline is what it is. I mean, it's. I think the headlines. I've seen so many people react to headlines that when you go into the article, say something completely different, which just proves that nobody's reading anymore, which is the big problem. I mean, I think we have so much information thrown at us at such a fast pace that we're not able to consume the media and actually parse it, understand it, and react to it in any kind of meaningful way. Instead, we're just reacting to it because we have a visceral reaction to a headline that says something pretty bad, and we get excited about it.
Wendi, when you said power of the people, that reminds me, have you guys seen the Black Mirror episode Nosedive, the one where people rate each other from 1 to 5 stars for every interaction?
That's bizarre.
And then that impacts your socioeconomic status? I mean, that's what we're doing here. You're a 1-star? Good luck. You can never get your rating back up.
Yeah.
I think it's very scary. Honestly, I think it's very, very, very scary.
Well, what's
somebody who spends as much time as I do, both having been a part of the media and observing it and commenting on it, if I'm having problems making heads or tails of this, and again, it's not an ego. It's not because I'm so great. It's just I spend a lot of time immersed in this. I can't imagine the average person who's working, who's got a couple kids trying to make ends meet and getting by, is just sort of flicking through their feed for fun. And it ties in all of our topics. You just can't make heads or tail of what is content, what's authentic, what's real, what's fake, who do I trust, who do I believe? And this includes your closest of friends now. It's hard to know what is real and what is not in this world. And it's getting increasingly more complex, getting back to my original point, because of the lack of transparency and clarity there.
You know what? It's just like this whole rating thing is really scary. Rating people is a scary proposition, which takes us to our next topic, which is annual performance reviews. It is time for the annual performance reviews to come out. Everybody's doing it. Everybody hates it. Nobody likes it. Mitch, I'm going to start with you because you're the one who most recently has been involved with giving performance reviews, I'm sure, many over the course of your career. Let's talk about this. Annual performance reviews. I read this great article which summarized the facts about performance reviews being ineffective, and that ongoing feedback is a much better way to go about things. And it sounded reasonable, but I want to put it in front of you and get your opinion about it. What do you think? Is the annual performance review an antiquated system that needs to go away? And can it be replaced by just regular meetings and ongoing discussions about a person's career?
Look, in full transparency, I hadn't touched HR in a long time, only because I just didn't think I was good at helping people figure out if they were good and or not good. That doesn't mean I didn't have an opinion on it, an opinion on the people we work with, on the people I work with at this moment. My general sentiment with performance reviews, whenever we discuss them at the management level, was these are not efficient. And my general sentiment, which I think can come true in this day and age, is that I always wondered if artificial intelligence or just general data can replace the big chunk of this. Did you show up? Did you do your work? Did you put in the time and energy and effort? Is this work that you're being successful at? I really do think that in a world of timesheets and other data points that we have as organizations, we can get to the sort of that baseline. And I think it's that confusion between the hard and the soft that creates the problem in the performance review. So we were always much happier, and I'm always much happier having conversations over feedback, right? So you want to have conversations about how that person is doing, how are their goals going, how do they feel about mentorship, what do they need to be satiated or get to the next level. And I consider that the soft stuff. And I think the hard stuff, or I shouldn't call it the hard stuff, but the sort of more quantitative stuff is easier to capture through data. But there's that old joke, right? Like someone makes a joke and you're like, oh, this will all be in your performance review. It's like becomes sort of like weird, like the Office type of satire where I just look at the whole thing and wonder, do we live in that world anymore? Do we not live in a world where we know if people showed up, did the job, accomplished it, and if that piece of work was successful or not, or was deployed or not? And can we not spend our time helping one another be better, work together better, and sort of embolden the culture by making sure everybody feels like they're a part of it? And I think that to me would be the ideal thing when it comes to performance reviews.
Yeah, Mitch, what you said reminded me, Roger Dooley has this phrase, I heard it on a podcast he was on, a 20th century hangover. So this 20th century industrial era thinking, these performance reviews, they're very much inefficient, like you said. I mean, annual, what is the effect in psychology? I think it's the recency bias. So we're more impacted by feedback that is more recent. And of course, the closer the feedback is to the behavior, the more impactful. If the behavior happened 3 months ago, the feedback is almost irrelevant, let alone a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you go to your doctor for your annual checkup, and he's like, "How do you feel?" And you're like, "I feel okay." But if actually there was this sort of tracking, whether it's your Apple Watch or whatever, that's giving him every single day your blood pressure, every single day your stress level, how often you met it, like he'll be able to, or she'll be able to come to you with a much more vivid response back because they had spent time looking historically at sort of where your peaks and valleys were. And you're right, it's exactly that. It's this weird moment in time. It's the end of the year. We're all tired. We're all racing towards Christmas, the end of Q4. Is this the best time to be talking? Like, I feel the same way. It's like, how is it going today? Like, am I going to be able to remember what the first 2 quarters was like? It's tough.
Are we talking about the same thing though? Because I think that Mitch, you're talking about the individual interaction. Interactions with individuals about their own performance is one thing, but getting feedback from third parties that gives you that insight into how the person's being perceived in the workplace, there is no real way to do that other than the annual performance review, right? I mean, it's just like,
well, you could speak to customers, and you can speak to partners, and there's ways to capture it rather than the way we sort of traditionally do it, and sort of how you think things are going. And as your manager, I'm going to give you some perspective based off of a couple snap emails, some people on your team, or some anecdotal feedback I have. People either want this really formal, which again goes back to the hard stuff, or they want it to be more what I'll call motivational or soft, which is just help me be better. And I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get people to be better and get people to buy into the culture.
You know, one of the things that I loved about this article in terms of, you know, not just throwing out the entire process involved in making sure that your employee is on track and getting the full experience of their employment with you, you know, it didn't say throw out the entire tracking process. It said to take notes, take copious notes, make sure that you're documenting everything, which is exactly like a performance review. What you're essentially saying is we need performance reviews, but we need to spread it out over the course of a 12-month period with consistent feedback that's well documented so that you can, you know, give that person that documented road or roadmap toward the success that they want to achieve within the company that they're performing in. So, I mean, I think that's a good suggestion as well. Well, with that,
It's kind of like the leaderboard or whatever on a Peloton, right? You see where you're at. You just go to work every day and you see how you're ranking. I don't know.
You need it to be more like CrossFit, your job, yeah.
Yeah.
I've got the solution, employee of the month. That's a great solution.
Yeah.
Make sure that happens.
Personal best, yeah.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Emily Binder. You can find her at BeetleMoment.com. That's the home of her consultancy, where she is doing excellent work, just like the suggestion she gave during the show, in the voice marketing space. So tell us, Emily, what's on your agenda? What would you like to promote?
That's right, Bob. I am focusing on all things voice technology. So if you have a brand or a product or service and don't have a strategy for being found on voice and getting your content on voice, and when I say voice, I mean voice assistants like Alexa and Google Assistant, Siri, etc., give me a call. Check it out at BeetleMoment.com. You can read my blog, check out my podcast and my flash briefing there, which is all content about voice marketing.
Now, Wendi Cooper, you can find her at WendiCooper.com. That's Wendi with an I. Wendi, tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote? And I want to come back to you after we're done.
What do I want to promote? Let's see. Okay, so everything that you need to know about me or whatever want to know about me is at WendiCooper.com. So I kind of did a one-stop shop website where you can see the portfolio from C-Spot Run and all my direct response stuff and my speaker and my podcast, which is The Wendi Cooper Show, Speaking of Age. It's conversations with remarkable people over 50. I'm just kind of searching for opportunities starting in January. I'm going to be available for more opportunities. And I really love what Emily's doing as far as voice and as being like a pioneer and all that of direct response from the early 90s, late 80s. I see voice as kind of being growing in that same direction where all of a sudden it just becomes a ubiquitous thing after being a redheaded stepchild. So, but I think I'm going to pursue something more in voice, meaning being the voice of brands. So I am looking into doing something like that in the future, but I'm kind of off the rails until January, as you know, Bob. So anyway, but
I was just going to say, thoughts are with you, because for those of you who don't know, Wendi is going through her last round of chemo coming up in the next week. So thoughts with you, yep. And it's just like, hope it goes well and everything going on. So
thank you.
Next up, Mitch Joel. You can find him at 6pixels.com. That's where he has his blog, where he has his podcasts, where he has all kinds of thoughts on a number of different subjects. And it's just a great all-around site that you want to get to if you want to find out more about Mitch's life. So tell us what's going on in your world, Mitch. What would you like to promote?
Well, yeah, for sure. Wendi, wishing you all the best and speedy recovery, and hope we can sit here and annoy Bob in another moment in time, which would be great.
Thank you, Mitch.
So one is I'm really excited that my podcast 6 Pixels of Separation is coming up on its 700th episode. I'm pretty sure, with the exception of Leo Laporte, it probably is the longest running consistent podcast in the history of podcasts. And in that episode, I'm having a super meta conversation with Seth Godin about podcasting. So that should be a fun one to check out. So that should be published in about a week or two's time. And then secondarily, I would say, hey, go to mitchjoel.com. If you're running an event, looking for a speaker, want me to come down and do my thing, I do about 40 to 60 keynote addresses every single year for B2B, B2C, small, medium, large enterprises and organizations. So if you're looking for a speaker for your next event, that's going to help your audience decode the future, feel free to reach out to me at mitchjoel.com.
And Mitch just mentioned Leo Laporte, so I have to bring up, for those of you who don't know, that's the founder of the twit.tv network that we talked about during our ad earlier. Great podcast, and fantastic, Mitch. Fantastic. 700 episodes is amazing. As for me, for more information about me or this poor, pitiful show that's only had 570 episodes, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can even find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it is time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First, the fair. TBWA Paris, for client Burns and Smiles, created an ad that shows an imaginary world where a severely burned teen is treated like everyone else over the course of a typical day. Wendi, I thought this was a really heartwarming ad, and it was really effective, if maybe a little unbelievable, because it's just like, I know what kind of problems burn victims experience in terms of people's looks and acceptance into society. It's a real problem, and it was such a wonderful vision of what life could be if we just got over our hang-ups about disabilities.
Yeah, it's interesting because here in El Segundo, I'm in El Segundo, and there is a young man that is a severe burn victim, and everyone just loves him. He goes to the high school. So when I saw the commercial, I was like, I loved it because I see him at the grocery store all the time. I mean, severely burned, just like this young man in the commercial. So leave it to the French to do something that was really beautifully executed. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, it was a really, really great ad. But now we move on to a not so great ad, the fail of the week. And I'm not calling the ad a fail as much as I am the backlash over this being the fail, but proving once again that details do indeed matter. An Australian Kentucky Fried Chicken ad was banned for showing a woman eating a $4.95 meal deal at night when the deal was only available during the daytime hours. Mitch, people got too much time on their hands. I mean, I think that it's right to call out the details not being correct in this ad, but this is just taking it a little too far, in my opinion. What's your thoughts?
I think it's ironic that we spend our whole show talking about people being media savvy, and once they are media savvy and actually raise us think about it, we go, guys, come on, can we get can we pull it together a little bit? It's like, I don't know. I look at that and I go, it's just embarrassing. It's embarrassing that it happened, and we live in that sort of gaslighting culture where it's stuff like that actually gives me hope that if we're going to pay attention to KFC and whether the deal's at night or day, maybe we'll actually pay attention from, which links our news come from.
Let's face it, only one person was paying attention, and one person rose a stink.
And it wasn't the creative director.
It was not the creative director. Well, the foul of the week, it looks like Burger King's Impossible Burger lawsuit may have some merit after all. This is the lawsuit where vegans were getting up in Burger King's face about the Impossible Burger being good for them. You can't really claim to have a 0% meat burger when you're cooking that product on a grill covered in meat fats. It seems like a really simple thing, Emily, to figure out that, you can't really market a product to the vegan community if it's actually covered in meat grease.
Right. This is vegan 101. This reminds me when I was in high school, I was a hardcore vegan for a couple of years, and I would refuse to wash the dishes if my parents had meat juices all over their plate during dinner. It's just like not doing it.
Do we, by the way, I'm sidebarring here and I shouldn't, but I love these burgers, by the way. I think they're very, very tasty. I'm wondering, do we know that this is true? Do we not know that they have a section of the grill that has been cleaned and is specific just for these things? Or is this sort of an assumption we make? And I don't know, so I'm just asking.
I don't know for sure.
The article said that you could order it microwaved if you didn't want it on the grill.
Ugh, that won't taste good. They should have methods to clean the grill off or section it off.
Section it off would have been my thought. But anyways, I'm getting technical. I apologize.
I have to say, because I live in the world of all of these tree huggers. Anyway, I'm kidding. But they didn't say it was vegan.
No,
right?
they did not. They never said.
At least it's supposed to be vegetarian.
It's plant-based,
They just
non-meat.
said it was 100% Whopper, 0% beef, which it is. Come on, give me a break. From an FTC point of view, it's 0% beef, and it's 100% Whopper because that's just what it is: buns with lettuce and cheese and whatever else is on a Whopper.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with Mitch. These things are delicious for a Whopper, which is not saying a whole lot because it's just like, I didn't really think Whoppers tasted that good before. Now I'm saying this is the best Whopper I've ever had, which is not exactly glowing endorsement for the product. Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it, comment online, use the hashtag FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's edition of the BeanCast. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.